Joining us today on the Digital Influence Show. Whether you are watching live on LinkedIn or YouTube or Facebook or Twitter or wherever the heck this thing goes, or you're listening to the edited version on the podcast, thank you so much for joining. I appreciate you being here. I get to be the host, Brandon Lee, and I am the founder of Funnel Amplified. And this podcast, this show has just been such a fun thing for me to do because I get to meet and I get to talk with pretty awesome people like I am doing today. So Carson Heedy is the founder of the Salesman on Fire podcast. He's an author of the best-selling book on Salesman on Fire. And he also happens to have this job, selling really cool stuff for a small company called Microsoft as a director there. So Carson, welcome to the Digital Influence Show.
Brandon, great to see you again. Thanks so much for having me. Thrilled to be here. And looking forward to our dialogue.
I am too. And one of the things that I really appreciate about you within social media is just how natural it is for you. And what I've always believed around social media is salespeople should be really good at social media because we should be really good at building relationships. And there's been this really big disconnect. And I think you are that bridge because you have embraced social like a full service sales rep that's out shaking hands, meeting people, building relationships, furthering relationships, and you do it so well. That's why I've been so excited to not just have you on the show, but as we've had multiple conversations. So thank you for doing that, first of all. It's been awesome for me to learn.
It's one of those funny things, Brandon. It was years ago, I discovered I needed to learn how to do something well. And what it was for me was the relationship element. But, like anything with sales, it's all about the fundamentals and people and process. But the tools change, the playing field changed. And I think that's why it's so important to embrace anything that enables relationships, because relationships beget deals. And so, I don't do it perfectly, and I don't purport to even be an expert at this stuff. I'm always learning, and I'm always leveraging whatever I can to open doors that would be closed to me otherwise.
Yeah. And you said it perfectly, I think. And we can almost kind of mic drop and call it a day. It's sales has always been about systems. It's been about your strategies, but it's always been about relationships and consistency, consistently doing those activities. And social is just a new tool, but man, if we take those old mindsets and activities around relationship building, because relationships are where opportunities come about, and we apply it into this new channel called social that makes us go, like there's no world where you and I would have met outside of social media, in my opinion.
That's true. Unless we walked by each other in an airport someday and we wouldn't know each other. But it's, what's amazing to me, Brandon, is you said something really important earlier on in the conversation. And it was that there's a big divide when it comes to social. I think a lot of folks, they don't know where to begin. With these great tools, I like to say comes great responsibility. There's a reason why it isn't done effectively, because I think a lot of folks are not necessarily trained on how to effectively leverage these tools to create relationships. They think that if they post something or if they connect and then they send a message immediately talking about what they do, that it's going to create this path into a sale. And it doesn't work like that. I mean, first off, the sale isn't the goal here. The conversation and the relationship is the goal. As sellers, we strive to earn the right to become trusted advisor. And without that, there's no meaningful deal. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm sure somewhere along the line, somebody leveraged a LinkedIn message and sent a message that led to a conversation that wasn't written well or regurgitated their company talking points, and perhaps it worked to some degree and gave them false hope. But the reality is these are tools that can enable a conversation and a relationship. And that's why, it's important that sellers embrace it, as you said, but also do it the right way.
Yeah. and I'm going to do this all day. I think all through this, I'm going to be like, you're so right. You're so right. but
okay. I don't get that a lot. So
it'll be an ego feeding event. But so here's a topic for everybody that we promoted this with, and it was strategic and daily social activities. And, we baited this, of course. I threw this out because you did close a 9-figure deal, and you give a lot of the credit for everybody, a lot of credit, not all the credit. This wasn't like a social deal, right? But you give a lot of credit to the work that you and your team did in LinkedIn. So using that experience of closing that deal as kind of the foundation, the question for everybody is, are there daily social activities that we all should be doing? And if so, what are those? So that's my invitation to everybody. Chat in your questions, your comments, your feedback on that. But Carson, I bring that to you as a question. When you close that 9-figure deal, what were some of the important, or what was the most important daily social activity that you and your team members consistently did?
I'm going to simplify that because that's a great question, Brandon. It came down to nurturing the relationships and managing to milestones. When you create a relationship with an executive, you obviously want to understand their priorities, their pain points, and you need to uncover, like, is this something where, we can fill gaps, where we can complement what they do? Because if it isn't, I've absolutely had scenarios where I've recommended customers talk to my competition because I care more about the relationship and being the trusted advisor as opposed to selling them something that they don't need. Now, in this case, it was a scenario where we created a lot of relationships on LinkedIn, turned those into live physical relationships pre-pandemic, and then during the pandemic, turned them into conversations just like this. And all the while, we're creating new relationships because building pipeline is perpetual and creation of relationships is perpetual. But at the same time, those daily activities, I build a framework around everything that I try to do. I've got daily non-negotiables, and I'll go down my list every day and I'll ask myself, is there something I need to do to impact or influence this part of the project? Is there a phone call I need to make to a customer? Is there a email I need to send to a vendor? Whatever it is, you go down those lists every single day. And from a social perspective, some of that can take place in social. I do try to post and create. I'm intentional about personal brand, and I'm cognizant that trying to present myself as a thought leader around things like leadership and building culture, where a lot of these line of business executives, they care about that too. In fact, I've started interviewing a lot of these line of business executives on my own podcast for that very reason, to find those mutual synergies. It isn't just about trying to figure out if there's a fit to sell something. It's let's do business together because we have mutual goals and we care about what looks like a win to each other. So really that daily component, it's perhaps creating something engaging that can be posted via social. But that doesn't, making a good social post doesn't mean somebody's going to send me a PO to my LinkedIn inbox later in the day. Right. So it's important to me because I like to start conversations. That is often done with our customers. And then the other elements is how I'm using LinkedIn to try to open new doors and get new meetings.
Carson, again, what I like about what you said is initially when I said, what were those, dailies? And you said there's two things that you did. You nurtured relationships and you managed milestones. That had nothing to do with social media, but social, using LinkedIn, using Zoom, using email, using phone, using a plane. Those may have been the channels that you used, right? But you're focused on the basics. And that's where I think, like our mutual friend Bill McCormick will say, look, all sales are social.
Yes.
It doesn't mean social media, but all sales are social. And social media becomes this new tool that can amplify things, that can communicate things at scale. As you talked about your personal brand and talking about, leadership and culture really has nothing to do with what you sell at Microsoft directly. but as you said, it has everything to do with your buyers and what they think about as they run their business. And social gives you that opportunity. Does creating content around leadership and culture, does that contribute to those relationships?
A great deal. And here's the thing: some of these things aren't necessarily obvious when you start doing them. I remember when I first got on LinkedIn and I started having, getting connection requests, and you connect with people that and then over time you start to realize, I heard years ago, that we needed to get these different relationships with line of business, executives, C-level VPs. We needed to create those relationships, and I said to myself, well, a lot of these folks are out on LinkedIn. Let me utilize that to go out and create some of these relationships. But we all have to seek to find the right messaging in order to entice them to have a conversation in a meeting. And there's different ways to do that. There's different mechanisms that we can employ, whether it's sending an article that shows we were paying attention in a meeting, to what I've started doing recently, which is sending messages to some of these executives and asking them if they'd like to explore having dialogue on a podcast, as an example. So, in those cases, those are things that are very near and dear to my heart: leadership, culture, selling, investment in people, employee engagement, recruiting and nurturing talent. And guess what? Those are also top of mind for a lot of the executives that ultimately you want to break bread with, and will ultimately beget deals if the relationship is strong. And here's the thing: you go into these things looking to give. That's the key element. I'm not looking to, spotlight myself or anything of that nature. In fact, when I interview somebody on a podcast, much like you do, Brandon, it's spotlighting that perspective. I'm always learning. I had an executive that I interviewed a few months back, and they laid out some of these rules for, how their teams interact with them that were set up from a level of mutual respect and very strong culture building. And that really resonated with me. So selfishly, I love to learn, but at the same time, my goal was to spotlight them and their perspectives. So those types of things go a long way, and we're still doing things together, working within our companies as well.
Yeah. Now I want to bring Tom. Thank you for jumping in. Our other mutual friend, Tom Burton, on there, asking you this question. Have you found that social is a more effective communication channel than phone, email, or other traditional sales channels?
No, it's just that I don't discriminate against any way of talking to or meeting with a customer. That's really it. I'm a big probability and odds believer. I know Tom and I have had the conversation about one of our mutually favorite films, Moneyball. Very data-driven approach. You're talking about the Oakland A's GM, Billy Beane, who had to go up against teams that had budgets that were 3 and 4 times his own, still manages to bring home a pennant, right? And no spoilers, sorry. But in case you didn't know that story from 20 years ago. But it's a data-driven approach, Brandon. And I think what we have to focus on as sellers is, look, I can control sometimes I can control very few things in the sales cycle, right? I can control the quantity of outreach that I make. I can control the quality of that outreach, the messaging, what I say, what I choose to say in order to get the meeting. And then I can control the consistency of execution over time. It's important that we're always prospecting. It's important that we're always creating and investing in relationships. And I can do that on the phone. I can do that via email. I can do that through any channel. Now, at the end of the day, I look to leverage LinkedIn as an example in order to create a face-to-face meeting. You alluded to this 9-figure deal that started when I sent a LinkedIn request to the president, day 2, covering this customer, and I was in his office the next week. I used that to get to the next phase. Walked into the office, gave him a copy of my CEO's book, highlighted some passages, and uncovered where I thought we could be a fit. And then it was all about me bringing in the right resources. And obviously it had a very long sales cycle. But I think the key element is it doesn't matter if it's on the phone. In fact, I usually talk to this gentleman now on the phone 2 years later. It's you use whatever mechanism is needed or works best in order to open up that relationship. I liked LinkedIn because it helps me scale. I can send a lot of messages in order to create these conversations.
Yeah, and Gabrielle jumped in with this question, which was just timely and perfect. She definitely believes in the power of social and building relationships and accelerating deals. However, and this is a big challenge, how can we convince sellers, particularly those that have never really tried it as a tool?
I love that question. I always like to go to sellers and I ask them, are you 100% satisfied with your results? Rarely do you get somebody that says, yes, I am. So, what are you gambling? If you're dissatisfied with your results, what are you gambling if you embrace new ways of creating relationships and ultimately closing deals? When I started doing this years ago, it was about a decade ago. And I remember like the comments about, oh, well, so and so is doing this around pipeline. Carson's doing LinkedIn, whatever that means. Right. I didn't have the results to back it up at the time. Over time, over that first year of doing social selling as an account executive, I closed 11 deals that would not have existed without LinkedIn. 11 for millions of dollars, right? So it got attention. Then I started being asked to train my team and other teams and other business units. Here we are several years later, and I mean, every week I get asked to train somebody elsewhere in the world. And so being able to say now that I've closed well over $200 million of revenue that would not have existed without LinkedIn, that is often my opening with sellers. Mm-hmm. But other than that, it's the statistics. There are a lot of great statistics that are out there that show the percentage of the probability that you will hit goal if you embrace these tools over those who do not. But the reality for me, it's been a personal journey. It's been really doubling down on the probability and odds. I have a greater probability of closing deals if I create more relationships and being able to do these things at scale. You and I have talked about this, Brandon. I mean, in the 9-figure deal that was just recently closed, I reached out to over 500 people in that organization over the 2 years that I supported them, over 500 director and above, and, created a groundswell. It does two things. One, I understand I'm at the pulse of that business. So I bring innate value by knowing their business units so well that they needed me. They needed that intel. And then on the flip side of that, you've created so many relationships that you have a vested interest that everyone that you're talking to wins as a part of whatever the deal iteration is. So that's how you really create that groundswell. But I think statistics of effectiveness and then also the results speak for themselves. It works.
Yeah. And to piggyback on top of that, how do you answer to piggyback on Gabrielle's question and that great answer you just gave? How do you answer, and maybe you don't get this as much, but I'll hear questions a lot of like, okay, well, how can we do this in like 15 minutes a day? And normally my answer is, well, if that's what you're allocating to this, don't, because you're not thinking about it the right way. It would be like saying, hey, make one phone call a day to one person, but how can I make one phone call and have it work for 100 type of thing? How do you ever get that question, or how would you address that?
Yeah. And Brandon, I think you just hit one of the big blockers too, to speak to Gabrielle's question. It's, a lot of people say I don't have the time. I got a message recently where somebody was like, I don't think sellers typically have the time to be able to invest in this type of stuff. Well, why not? I've spent hours going in and manually pulling leads that have opted into marketing with our company at various times. And it's because there wasn't a system to export these leads, but there's a higher probability that they're going to respond if I reach out. So I'm finding ways to work smarter, right? Because now I know that if I pick up the phone and I just cold call dial, I may go 0 for 50, right? I may need 100 or more dials to get somebody live on the phone. I know that if, the warmest lead is a warm referral. Somebody says, Brandon, love you. Let me introduce you to the VP of XYZ. Great. That's viability of me getting that conversation is close to 100%. Right. But if I'm cold calling, it may be 1 in 100 that I even get a live body, much less a first date. And so I think the key that we've got to focus on is finding those ways to really work smart. And getting over some of those objections. If I'm not satisfied with my results, I'm willing to do just about anything to go out and create the relationships that I need to get done what I want to get done. And so
Yeah.
are there days that I spend more than 15 minutes on social? Sure. There's might be days where I spend an hour because I'm actually going out there proactively and building a campaign to go out and create relationships with these executives that I've deemed necessary to get done what I want to get done. Why would I want to find something that's only 15 minutes? So I think
Right.
it's assimilate this into your sales process and continue to evolve it and develop that muscle so that it's just as comfortable a muscle as some of the other things that we do. That's
Yeah.
important. I don't think you put a timetable on it. I think you continue to seek to evolve it to the point that it's an optimal process.
Yeah. Yeah. And I agree. And I think it sticks it in a box like, oh, okay, well, um, how much time do we allocate to your team to send emails? Do we give them 30 minutes a day? Well, no, they send out emails when they need to. Well, there's our answer when it comes to social too, is if it's a communication channel and the goal is to build rapport, build relationship, build trust, well, you use the channel that's the most effective for that.
I
And
think a lot of
social,
people go back to comfortable ways of mediocrity or failing.
yeah,
It's easy to send an email, right? It may not be as comfortable to leverage LinkedIn to go out and try to create relationships. And that's why we go back to comfortable ways of mediocrity or failing. And we have to jettison those old processes or those old beliefs. I doubled down on this process years ago. It had a slow start. I think you recently said on social that, these things aren't for the instant gratification. It takes time to build momentum around these activities. We plant these seeds we cannot control when they will grow. And
right.
so I believed in the process because of the probability factor. I know that if I reach out to 500 people, I'm going to get some conversations. And I know what I can do with those conversations. And that's what it really came down to. So I didn't
Yeah.
have immediate results when I started doing this stuff. But over time, you plant enough of these and it will pay dividends.
Yeah. And it's the same whether it's creating content. Well, why do I create content? Look, it's not I post content and POs come into my inbox as we've talked about before. But when we're creating content and it's strategic content that appeals, like I think you've said it earlier, if I post something around, hey, I had a conversation with the prospect and they asked me this question and I post something around that conversation and I post it, well, all my other prospects are going to be interested in it. Right. Because now I become a catalyst to help facilitate information that helps them. And as you said many times, it's about giving. Well, yeah, I'm giving, but in the process, I also established being kind of that core, central part of the conversation. And that's where salespeople want to be, right? That's where salespeople should be. And that's what comes with creating a post, not, oh, check the box, I created a post. Look in my inbox, there's no POs. Oh, this thing doesn't work. Social selling sucks.
And I got to tell you, be creative. It's anybody can go out and make a post, right? And I think sometimes people struggle with, hey, what should I go out and post? What should I go out and say? You got to find the mediums and the mechanisms that are comfortable to you. Your process, my process, anyone watching's process, they're all going to look different, and that's okay. Use this to show up differently. One of the best ways that I use social was actually not about me posting or messaging. It was social listening. And it was being able to see that an executive that wouldn't give me the time of day, he was able to go to his profile and see that he was a prolific speaker and author and blogger, and he was on podcasts all the time. And so I thought to myself, hey, how should I show up for this executive, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I reached out to him and said, based on everything that you're doing, I think we could learn a lot from you. And I'd like to introduce you to my chief XYZ, right? My executive. And because I think we could learn a lot from you. This is what my executive does. And I'd love to see where the conversation goes. And guess what? After going 0 for 10 with this executive, he responded. He said, well played. And I got the meeting set up with them. For me, it's more about being a catalyst. I don't have to be the smartest person in the room. In fact, I rarely am. And if I am the smartest person in the room, we're in trouble. And so for me, it's more about how do I open the door? How do I put the right resources and the right people in place to do magical things? Sometimes it's about getting the heck out of the way. And
Mhm.
9 months later, we closed a massive deal with that organization. Wouldn't have happened without social, but it didn't look like what a lot of people think social is. I never messaged him on LinkedIn. All I did was utilize LinkedIn to find out a little bit more about him so that I could meet him where he was.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think so. A couple of comments on here, Trevor. Buyers on social, then that's where I hang out. Right? If it's at a trade event, okay, not email, not cold calls, right? And when trade events, great, I'm going to go there, but that happens for a weekend or a week, and then it's gone. And Trevor, I think, has got a great story about using social to prep and meet all the people he wanted to spend face-to-face time with at the conference. And he spent a good 6 months of a campaign working towards getting in front of them through commenting on activities that they're already commenting on or liking, and getting in front of them and building that community. And I love what our buddy Tom says, mediocrity and social. It's right. Where's his other one on there? I think he said adapt or die. There it is. That was the one I meant to show.
From Moneyball.
Adapt or die. That's right. That's right. Carson, I love your story about using social to listen. What are some tips or strategies that you have for people in using social as that tool to open a conversation, to start a relationship? And I think your story is so relevant to so many people. I tried 10 times, I tried 20 times, I'm getting shut out. And I kind of equate it to old school sales, at least when I started. It's, some people, when I went and door knocked, I brought donuts. Others, I found out, man, they didn't really like donuts. So I brought, bagels. And I found out somewhere a little bit, I brought cannolis to this one. I found an Italian bakery and I brought cannolis to this. Or, I found out that the person I want to talk to was a baseball fan. You go get tickets to the baseball game. Like, you constantly are learning. And I think that same mindset relates to our presence on social media. Is that accurate? Is that kind of the same way that you would express it? And you're talking about use social for intel.
That's it. I'm going to quote one of my other favorite sales movies here. Gordon Gekko said that information is still the greatest commodity, right? So there's no better commodity than information. And it's true. And you can get information from anywhere. We've read the Challenger sales statistics. Your buyer is way down the journey by the time they engage with you. But on the flip side of that, you can control the information that you're consuming. I go out and I subscribe to every email alert for every customer that my team supports. I go out and I subscribe to trade magazines. My team today is in healthcare, so I subscribe to every one of those so I can consume that. But we've got to build our business again around probability and odds. We are beholden sometimes if there's a compelling event, like we have an existing customer and there's renewals, we can leverage those events to optimize, talk time with the customer. On the flip side of that, you can create compelling events. I've had another great story was a relationship that formed several years ago. And I was following a company on Sales Navigator, and I saw in Sales Navigator and also in the Business Journal that they had named a new C-level. And this organization had managed their business very siloed before. They did a little bit with us, but they also did with others, right? Because each business unit did their own thing. Well, I was first to the dance with this new executive because I messaged him immediately upon seeing that he was named. He was moving into St. Louis from another region. Just offered to be helpful, right? We have a relationship today with your organization. I'm happy to, articulate what that entails. But also if you are moving kids and you need to know about school districts or, places to live or anything like that, happy to be of value. I've lived here 20 plus years. And, lo and behold, I'm in his office the next week. I beat all the competitors into his office, and we developed a relationship and rapport. And it wasn't like immediate magic, right? It was one of those things like it was just an investment of time, but it was social listening. that cued me to reach out to this gentleman. I asked him, like, what do you expect out of our relationship? What looks like a win to you? If I'm able to deliver wins to you, what does that look like? And he talked to me about how they were going to do business differently. And lo and behold, they broke down the silos in the business and ultimately ended up signing a big deal with us. And here's my favorite part of the story is not the deal that happened. My favorite part of the story is that years later, after I no longer even supported the customer, I was brought in to help with the renewal. And here's why: because our relationship was so strong that he wanted to work with me. And I ended up getting carte blanche to go out and close this deal myself, even though I know I didn't even support the customer anymore because the relationship was that strong. And so it goes to show that relationship is the end result that you want. And it all started because of social listening. I had my mouse finger at the pulse of what was going on in the industry, in that organization, just by following them on social media.
Yeah. Carson, I got a strange question for you as we're talking about social. It seems to me like so much of your success really had nothing to do with the tools you used as much as the mindset you have about giving and relationship. And I feel, and this, my old man gray hair starts to come out. I feel like our sales culture is losing that to lost it, where it's about everything, even in B2B, is about a transaction, not a relationship. What are your thoughts on that? Is that fair?
It is fair. You know where the problem starts, though, is it does start with what we talked about before, with the culture and the leadership. It's got to be something that we train. It has to be a culture that we establish and that we nurture, because we've all had what I would imagine we would call good managers, and we've all had what we would call bad managers. And if it's all about make this many dials, sell this many widgets, and it's not about, hey, what great relationships did you form this quarter? Mm-hmm. That's where we set the tone as leaders. And that's why I think it's super important. A sales leadership role has some of the greatest responsibility for creating and nurturing the culture, like you described, but where we're sticking to the fundamentals of what's really important and doubling down on relationships. Because here's the thing. Look, I'm very fortunate because I'm willing to use all the tools at my disposal. Social has been a big one for me in order to create the relationships that have ultimately defined my success. But I've been very successful for two reasons. One, using things like LinkedIn to open these doors at scale and go in and create relationships. While none of those relationships or those deals that I've articulated during this call today would have happened without LinkedIn, they also wouldn't have happened without genuinely investing authentically in relationships or bringing all the resources to bear, like knowing the resources that I could bring to bear and, creative deal making, negotiation skills. All the tools of the trade are important. But guess what? Social gives you more at bats. Social gives you better intel. And that's why those things are important. I had the very serendipitous good fortune years ago as well of writing a book that I had a lot of followers that I gained over time by creating conversations and posting content for a decade. And so when I was here at Microsoft a few years back, I was part of this social engagement platform, and we would post curated content. And because I had more followers than anybody, I got more engagement. And so there was a leaderboard. People started to know who I was, and they would reach out to me. And so it's all about how can you leverage these things in order to impact your day-to-day, where you're trying to create relationships and invest in them, but also creation of investing in yourself and your personal brand. I've utilized that personal brand to create relationships geographically. There are no geographical barriers anymore. And just like you mentioned, Brandon, that's why you and I are here right now. And so I'm very thankful for that. I'm very blessed to have those tools at my disposal, but I had to know how to use them and use them appropriately.
Yeah, I think that can't be emphasized enough, that it starts with leadership. And as Trevor's comment, he says here, more companies are cutting off their sales reps from real social investment because they see it as just fooling around on the employer's time. And I think that's the same mindset that comes with, well, they don't have time for this, so what can they do in 15 minutes a day? And as I talk with companies about social, if leadership isn't have the mindset of relationships are important, it's not even worth our time talking about social, because they're never going to get there. I was very, very fortunate and a clueless kid in my first sales job. I had a boss who was actually the COO of the company at the time. I don't know why he led sales back then. I didn't know any better, but and he told me, he said, your job is to go out and be known and liked and trusted. That's what I want you to do for the first 6 months. First 6 months. I want you to go out and I want you to meet these people. I want you to get to know them, and I want you to be likable. And when the opportunities for sales come up, then we bring the team in, because you're not the smartest person on the team. You're never going to be the smartest person on the team, but that's what we got a team of people behind us to do. So you just go build relationships and open up the door for the opportunity. Then we'll bring the cavalry in, and we'll come in collectively and close the deal. And I just thought that's the way life worked. I was very fortunate as a first job, I think.
Yeah, it's an interesting scenario. It kind of reminds me of Boiler Room, when they, you get the lead warm and then you yell Recco. But what I think is interesting about this, Brandon, is like, we've got to turn that lens to our teams as well. We've got to empower them and greenlight them to win.
Yeah.
If somebody earns the right to join my sales team, then unless they show me that they can't be successful, who am I to say that their process is wrong? Everybody's going to have their own way of doing it. I always tell my team, like, you've earned the right to be in this role. Go do your way. We are going to share best and better practices so that we can all get better. We're going to story tell. And if you do something, I certainly want to replicate that to other members of the team. But I feel like that is where we've got to empower and enable our sellers to go out and do it their way. If somebody's playing on social, but they're closing multi-million-dollar deals, play away, right? I mean, but again, that's where it starts at sales leadership. And frankly, there are multiple levels of sales leadership, right? At some level, if somebody's breathing down somebody's neck and there's pressure and there's stress, and somebody doesn't know how to take the pressure and stress, often that ends up damaging the relationship from a sales manager to a seller, where we are micromanaging, we're putting undue stress on them, and we're so desperate that we go off of our process. You don't change your golf or your baseball swing because of a slump. In fact, your goal is to get back to what got you to the majors, right?
Yeah.
You've got to get back to Old Faithful. And so I think that's what we all have to realize and embrace as sellers, that if there's something that we can do that makes us more effective at creating relationships and managing the sales process and the sales cycles, then by goodness, do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Always good stuff. Well, Carson, I'm always grateful to have conversations with you, whether we're recording them or not. I always learn so much. Thank you for that. As we wrap up, though, where can people find you if they want to reach out to you?
Yeah, thank you, Brandon. Always great. I echo your sentiment. Always great to spend time with you. I love your perspective, and you've certainly opened my eyes to different ways of looking at social and how to use it effectively. And I encourage people to reach out. I love connecting with other sellers and other folks that have questions around social. So LinkedIn, Twitter. I also have a blog at carsonvhetty.com. Would love to connect.
Excellent. And what about you go online with your salesman on fire, and I know you do it off of your LinkedIn profile, but how often do you do that? What's your schedule, and when can people find you there?
Yeah, that's a funny question. So that was one of those things that kind of started a couple of years ago. Talk about personal brand. I was actually just lamenting to somebody that I missed sitting around the water cooler talking about sales. And then I realized I could literally do it with anybody at any time. So I started having these conversations, publishing them, and starting dialogue. And then it took on a life of its own. People called it a podcast. I refuted the term because that implies commitment. I'm loosey-goosey with it. Somebody wants to have a conversation and record it. I say, let's do it. And that's when it happens. So it happens when there's a conversation, which fortunately for me is often.
Excellent. Well, and I know Tom and I are trying to recruit you to come be a regular contributor with us. So
Amen.
I just threw it out publicly for pressure purposes, no other reason.
No pressure. In fact,
Nope.
that is great news, and count me in.
Yeah, it'll be fun. Well, hey, everybody that's listening, look, the goal that I had today was to hear a lot of times on my show, I talk with SMBs, I talk with professional service providers, I talk with direct, sales practitioners. What I love with Carson, with having conversations with him, is he's at a different level. He's at that enterprise level. And I'm not saying for anybody listening, that's good or that's bad. It's just different. But here's the reality: is the same daily activities, listening, communicating, adding, commenting on what your prospects are doing on social, using social as a medium to communicate consistently, building your personal brand, whether it's creating a post or whether it's building a podcast or a show. If the more people we know, and the more people that know us and the more relationships we have, the beautiful thing is more opportunities come about. And that's really the simple name of the social game. And for me, it sure as a heck, I'd much rather have 30 minutes or however long we've done on a conversation with someone like Carson, recording it, than pounding out an extra 20 cold calls that I leave voicemails that don't get returned. But that's just my preference. So anyway, everybody, thank you so much for paying attention to the Digital Influence Show. Carson, thank you so much for joining me again today. I appreciate it. And everybody else, if you like the show, hey, throw me a thumbs up, like it, screen capture it on your phone, share it with people. I would really appreciate it, as we're just trying to get this social message in front of more and more people. So thanks again for watching, and have a great day.